Right, good afternoon, everyone. A particular good afternoon to the extremely well-populated intelligent table right in front of me. They've rolled out the lawyer to talk to you, and of course, whenever they roll out the lawyer, that means that half of the people who might watch you roll out at the same time. But I'll try and keep it moderately entertaining for you on what is, let's face it, a roller coaster and sexy subject of is leadership a legal requirement under health and safety law. I'll put the arguments for and against, I hope. You may wonder, well, who is this bloke and why have they rolled him out here? I am a health and safety lawyer by trade. Despite my youthful countenance, I've been doing it rather a long time, and particularly in the minerals and extractive sectors where I have advised and assisted some of the largest organisations in the sector as well as some of the smallest. My name is Alan Millband. That's Millband, so it's a vowel short of a politician. That presupposes any of you can remember who the Milbands actually were. But there's something about my background. I won't trouble you with that. But a long-standing association with the sector, and that's why I've been invited to speak to you today. And perhaps quickly just to add to the bit of pedigree, I do edit the Institute of Quarrying's Health and Safety Law textbook, soon to be republished. And I do a little bit of lecturing on the honours degree course in minerals management at the University of Derby. But anyway, the subject today is leadership, a legal requirement under health and safety law. Following the thread from plenty of other speakers, there is a simple fact, I think, about leadership, and it's one of those things that's not particularly easy to define, although we suspect that we know what qualities make a good leader. That is a picture of a Yeti. You may be forgiven for thinking it was perhaps one of my colleagues or possibly an inspector from the Health and Safety Executive, but none of us have ever seen a Yeti, and yet we've got a pretty good idea what one might look like. We can describe one, we think, but we've never seen one, so we don't know what it looks like. And actually, the point I'm trying to make there is that leadership is not easy to define and describe, but we seem to have a feeling for what it looks like. And one of the things that might be asked is, do we actually need an accurate definition of leadership in order to see what it looks like and be able to touch it and feel it? And I suspect not. So what do good leaders look like? Not necessarily like that lot, because they indeed may fit within a definition of leader, but they also, as you've probably gathered, fit rather nicely into the definition of dictator as well. And oddly enough, there's a difference between a good leader and a dictator, irrespective of whether some of you think that they may have had some good ideas. So, when I first researched for this presentation some time ago now, because I've presented it previously, and I'm sorry, it isn't like fine wine, it doesn't get any better with age. But when I researched it, I found in particular online something that I thought was quite helpful from Forbes magazine, of all things, which said, what sort of qualities do effective leaders possess? And it gave some examples. Well, they make decisions. They communicate expectations. They challenge people to think. And they lead by example. So, so far most of the guys in the previous slide probably tick those boxes, but it's at this point where we move outside the theatre of dictatorship and, if you like, the do what I say, not what I do example into other qualities that reflect well on good leaders, that they are accountable to others, that they provide continuous feedback, properly allocate and deploy talent, ask questions and seek counsel, and make others feel safe to speak up, which strikes me as particularly important. So what does good leadership look like? Anyone down on the floor know who that is?
Hillary.
Nope. Sorry, do you mean by that Sir Edmund Hillary, or do you mean just Hillary at your office?
No, I mean Sir Edmund.
Oh, right, okay, no. But close. I'll allow you to continue the theme. It's actually Lord Hunt. And you've probably twigged that the other guys are Hillary and Tenzing. Yeah, so I don't need to explain to you, I don't think, what they did all those years ago. But it might assist you to know that actually Lord Hunt was not necessarily the expected guy to lead that expedition, but another guy called Eric Shipton, who was arguably the better mountaineer, but Lord Hunt had military experience and background. And what this means is that it's not always the leader who has his skills only in the sector who will necessarily make the best leader. Sometimes you draw on skills gained from other sectors as well. So there we are. Anyone want to tell me who that is? Go on, give it a guess. Yeah, Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, and there he is with the American flag. I can't tell whether he's pulling it or whether it's waving nicely in the breeze of the moon where there's no wind whatsoever. But anyway, there's Neil Armstrong standing on the moon. Well, apparently President Kennedy said at the beginning of the 1960s that the States would have a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Well, that's all very well for him to say, but somebody then had to deliver it in practice, and that would have been NASA, and no doubt they sat round the table thinking, oh, crikey, old Glittergob sounded off, and now we've got to do something about that and get somebody on the moon within the next, 8 or 9 years that he'd given them. And typically for NASA, I'm sure they sat round the table saying, come on, guys, it's not rocket science. What are we going to do? And the answer is, you know, that they got a man on the moon within that time, which shows however challenging the goal, with the right leadership, anything's possible. So, having given you some examples of what we think might constitute good leadership, and by no means an exhaustive list, the next question is, to get back on topic with this little presentation, is, well, where does it actually say, where does it use the word leadership in any of the relevant statutory health and safety provisions, in any relevant health and safety law? And the answer to that is nowhere at all. And at this point, you're probably thinking, hey, that's all right. We're less than 10 minutes into this and we've got rid of the lawyer. The question postulated is leadership a legal requirement under health and safety law, and he cannot point to any statutory provision for health and safety purposes where the word leadership is used. So doesn't that close the argument? And the answer is no, it doesn't. Sorry, we were going to get on to the law sooner or later, ladies and gents, and I will try and make it as exciting and as interesting as I possibly can, because I'm always up for a challenge. We have this thing called the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act of 1974. I won't take a show of hands to see who's heard of it, but it is of general application and explains the fundamental duties on employers and others. And in particular, we have Section 2 and Section 3. Section 2 requiring employers to ensure the safety of their employees at work, and Section 3.1 requiring the employers to ensure the safety of people that they don't employ but who might come into contact with what they do and have their health and safety compromised as a result. So we're talking there contractors, members of the public and the like. Now, the requirement there is to ensure the safety at work of the employees, to ensure the safety of the non-employees. Right, so while we might not be able to have a precise definition of leadership, I think we could probably agree between us what ensure means. If I want to ensure that my car gets clean this weekend, I either do it myself or stand over somebody else and make them do it. If I give it my best shot but it doesn't get cleaned, or the person I've assigned to the job wanders off because he or she's got something better to do, then I've not ensured it, have I? It's as simple as that. It's a qualified duty because, which is to say it's not absolute, because it is subject to the qualification of reasonable practicability. That's not about what's reasonable, that's about what needs to be applied to manage a risk properly in terms of cost being money, resource, time, etc. In simple terms, the duty is pretty much absolute, and if you're trying to fall back on a reasonable practicability argument, then it's for you to prove, not the prosecution, if you stand accused of a criminal offence. So, in very simple terms, an employer must ensure that. So one of the things that I'm going to say to you straight away is, how does an employer ensure that degree of safety in the absence of good leadership and effective leadership? Just think about that for a moment. We also have this thing in the Health and Safety at Work Act, Section 37. And this is a provision whereby senior officers of companies and organisations can be called to account for their failings if their company or organisation fails to meet its duties and obligations under health and safety law. Okay, so Section 37, I don't propose to read it out to you, it's set out there, means that effectively where for example, director of a company is negligent along with the company, then he too can feel the full force of criminal law. Our friends at the Health and Safety Executive can pursue him vehemently to call him to account, him or her, I hasten to add. And then directors can be disqualified under certain circumstances. Now, typically this is mostly used for financial and fiduciary misdoings and misdeeds, but it's not limited to that, because the court can make a disqualification order against a person where he's convicted of an indictable offence, which includes health and safety offences. So in simple terms, disqualification can follow if senior people in the organisation do not do their job properly. And if you stop to think about that for a moment, that is a form of statutory accountability. So we've looked at good qualities of leaders, and if you agree with me, being accountable to others is one of those qualities, and there is that quality written down in law. We also have these things called the Quarries regulations, which may be familiar to some of you. And regulations supplement the general duties under health and safety law, but make things more specific. And oddly enough, the Quarries regulations are targeted at quarries. So there's a little bit of what it says on the tin. And I've just highlighted two, but could have highlighted more provisions. We've got Regulation 6, where every operator must take necessary measures to ensure, again so far as reasonably practicable, that quarry in its plant, etc., designed, constructed, operated in a way that persons at work can perform the work assigned to them without endangering their own health and safety or that of other people. And again, ask yourself the question, how is Regulation 6 going to be unerringly complied with in practice in any quarrying organisation where there is less than effective leadership at operator level? In simple terms, it's not going to happen. And Regulation 8, and again I'm sure you're familiar with it, with a view to ensuring the health, safety and welfare of persons, it should be the duty of the operator to establish a management structure enabling the quarry to be operated in accordance with the health and safety document. The establishment of a management structure. Again, what we keep falling back on, even though the word is not used, is that leadership is an on-running theme through all of those, and without it, you might comply, but you're going to be lucky to comply without it. And it wouldn't be a lawyer if he wasn't up here having a quick mention about Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act 2007. It's been around a while now. Various organisations have been prosecuted, still not many, but more waiting in the wings. I don't like to think that it's only a matter of time before something like that hits our sector, but it has to be an ever-present risk in any organisation that doesn't have effective leadership, because it's fundamental to the offence that the organisation is only guilty if the way in which its activities are managed or organised by its senior management is a substantial element in the breach. So it must follow again that absent good and effective leadership, you are less likely to comply with duties, and the organisation will be left more vulnerable to an indictment under that legislation. Guidance and other similar materials. I don't know if you know, but I'm sure most of you do. Guidance materials are not the law. They are effectively a demonstration of best practice, or how the law can and should be complied with if you're going about it properly. So whilst it's not the law, the reality is that if you don't do things in accordance with official guidance, which can take various shapes and forms, then it will be down to you to prove that what you were doing was every bit as effective at complying with the law as if you'd followed the guidance. Now, in simple terms, if you decide that the ACOP to the Quarries Regs 1999 is not worth following, then you would have to prove that you were complying with the regulations by other equally effective means. You will not do that, because in simple terms, if you're not following the ACOP, you ain't going to comply with the quarries regulations, and I'm sorry, it's as simple as that. So even though it doesn't have the effect of law, it's telling you how to comply with it, and heaven forbid if you try and do it by any different means. Other guidance may be more debatable, but there are plenty of guidance materials, and the HSE has guidance that effectively spells out that leadership is a necessary requirement. And one of those is the Leadership and Worker Involvement Toolkit, which sets out the importance of good leadership and also offers a few views as to what makes good leaders. Have a look at it at some point. And I have to stress that even though there is a thrust in the arguments I've been putting forward this afternoon, that I am looking at leadership at, if you like, the very top level. It's important to follow the thread from other speakers. Leadership is at all kinds of levels in an organisation, and the demonstration of good and effective leadership is by no means the monopoly of the people at the top who drive the biggest cars. It goes far further down the organisation than that. So, conclusions. Is leadership a legal requirement under health and safety law, or at least what we understand by leadership and what we really in our hearts know that it looks like? Well, yeah, it's fair to say nowhere does the word leadership appear. So we might take the view that in theory it is not a requirement under health and safety law. But in practice, I hope for the reasons that I've set out, it is. Because quite simply, you stand no realistic chance of being fully compliant with your obligations under health and safety law unless there is good and effective leadership. And also I've referred to various statutory provisions from which you'll see that not only is there potential accountability of leaders in the organisation, but quite simply you are never going to fulfil those obligations unless the organisation is very, very well led. So safety cannot be ensured without a good health and safety culture, and absent good leadership, you are not going to have a good health and safety culture, whether you think otherwise or not. The final phrase, we take health and safety seriously. I almost unerringly include this in most of the presentations I do, because that's what every client, more or less, that I have ever represented in court charged with a health and safety offence has said to me, and the temptation to say obviously not seriously enough is almost too much to resist. In simple terms, I would far rather be saying of an organisation, it is very well led, has an excellent health and safety culture, and before this one-off, a very, very fine health and safety record. Because you do get setbacks. We have to be realistic. Yes, we know the goals, we know target zero, but there is, whether we like it or not, a risk that things can go wrong. And I'll leave you with a final thought. Does anyone recognise, I'll be amazed if you do, but does anyone recognise the two guys in the photograph on your left? Mountaineering theme? Bit of a giveaway. No. That's Tom Bourdillon and Charles Evans, and a few days before Hillary and Tenzing got to the top of Everest, those two guys were 300 feet short. And they were beaten back. Now, they were the first push. Things like that can damage morale. Things like that can make others in the group wonder if the target is ever going to be reached. Good leadership makes sure that that kind of setback is something that is noted as a setback from which lessons are learned, but which does not diminish the overall goal. And on the right is the NASA theme.
Apollo 13.
No, it's not actually. And I'm trying to think which one it is, but in the middle you have Gus Grissom. One of the astronauts is Chaffee, and I'm afraid you'll have to forgive me, but I've momentarily forgotten who the third one was. They were going through an exercise on top of a rocket on the launch pad at what was Cape Kennedy in those days, and there was a fire and they all died. So notwithstanding NASA's excellent leadership, there was still major setbacks along the way, and that was probably the most major of them all. But it did not diminish the overall goal. It did not take away the overall achievement. It's Ed White, is it? Ah, good-o. Yeah. Yeah, Google. It's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. We will soon have the Google section rather than general knowledge on Mastermind. It'd be interesting to see who wins. Ladies and gentlemen, assuming you did, thanks very much for listening. And do any of you have any questions for me? Oh, yes.
Is there a danger, listen to what you say, that we delegate leadership? For example, a company, to get around the regulations, if that's the right expression, you will ensure that your middle managers now all get really well qualified, so if anything happens below them, you can say, it wasn't me, Gov, because the bloke down below me was supposed to be qualified to take care of that, so I'm squeaky clean.
It's a good question. We're talking scapegoat to some extent, aren't we? But in simple terms, employers can delegate the day-to-day management of health and safety and compliance, but they cannot delegate the duty. And yes, there is a requirement that they bring on board competent advice. And if the middle guys to whom you've referred tick the boxes on the relevant competencies, but still something goes wrong, there is undoubtedly a protective layer between the top guys and what's happened. But you can rest assured that those who will investigate you, particularly for very serious matters, the health and safety executive, heaven forbid it could be the police in respect of a fatality, will look very, very closely at what went wrong at middle management level, what were the true root causes, and will also look at the roles and responsibilities of the very senior guys in the organisation to check whether the delegation is proper, satisfactory and acceptable in all the circumstances, or if it was something of a brazen attempt to try and create a layer of protectivity between senior management and potential wrongdoing. So in answer to your question, I wouldn't agree that they can simply palm it off, but I would agree that done properly it affords a moderate level of protection. I won't go further than that. Anything else? Yes.
Just following on from that theme, obviously quarries regs are pretty damn unique as regulations.
Yes.
Because the main two parties to that are the operator and the person working with Quarrying, as opposed to employer and employee.
Yes.
So it provides an 8.1c and an 8.1d specifically to take the legal responsibility for safety for the person working with the body,
Sure.
not the operator.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the leadership, the top leadership, if you like, has been devolved right down to the 8.1c. And is it right that the 8.1c really is in the firing line for leadership and responsibility?
Well, what I would...
Physically on the
Yeah, what I would argue is that your 8.1c and your 8.1ds are the guys who have to be there to show that the quarry is being properly managed whilst it's operating on a day-to-day basis. But how the regulations are drawn is simply showing what the operator must have in place to ensure that requirement. It does not mean that the operator, particularly when you hark back to, for example, Regulation 6, it doesn't mean that the operator is devolving responsibility onto the 8.1c, although I'll happily admit that 8.1cs and Ds do carry a significant degree of day-to-day responsibility. There's no argument about that. But I wouldn't accept the proposition that the law is so structured that it's absolved duties on the operator by some other means, because I don't accept it has.
Do you think the changing in sentencing guidelines are going to concentrate people's minds more to how they manage their health and safety?
I don't know. And the reason that I don't know is because they ought to, but at each and every point in the history of health and safety law where we've increased the potential punishment on offenders, I'm not persuaded that it has anything other than a little bit of a short-term shock effect. I think what we need to do is see what kind of differences we get in health and safety sentencing after the 1st of February. You're probably aware that the new sentencing guidelines aren't going to be taken into account by the courts until after 1st February 2016, well, on or after 1st February 2016, but anyone coming to sentencing in a health and safety case after that date, irrespective of when the offence is committed, is going to be sentenced according to the new definitive guideline. And there are marked changes in potential fines, vast ones, even for defined medium-sized companies. So certainly bigger fines are going to be rolled out. At this moment in time, there's probably a lot of people waiting to see what happens, but I suspect it could have a positive effect, and I think we all like to think it will, if we get a few organisations that are suddenly getting, let's say, £500,000 fines and upwards, even when they haven't killed anyone, because of course the guideline relates to harm and culpability, not the actual event. So it will be interesting to see what differences those make and whether that actually has an impact on people in how they address it. In a perfect world, the new sentencing guideline ought to drive even greater compliance, but forgive me for being a little bit cynical until I actually see some proof of it. It's the peril of asking the question of a lawyer, I suppose. We're cynical by nature, well, at least I am. Anything else? Thank you very much. Thanks.